And if you're not allocating your funds based on sales reps, and then at the end of the year, you're confused as to why your sales reps did not perform or why the sales volume's down or why one region sucks, it's because you didn't spend the time to do the math to figure out where to actually spend your money. So instead of being silly about it, just actually go back, look at your sales reps, look at your past year earnings, and figure out what markets did well, what markets didn't do well, and the ones that did not perform, put more money into those so that you can have better advertising, prospecting, leads, and sales opportunities in that market. Welcome to the Prospecting Show, where each week we talk about tips, tricks, and methods for growing an amazing small business pipeline. I'm your host, Dr. Connor Robertson, and on this podcast you can expect segments on communication, perceived value, opportunity, and closing. Thank you to everyone who's been supporting my 100 episodes in 100 days goal going into 2020. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to the Prospecting Show. This episode is going to be covering how much should you spend on marketing. And this is an interesting question. I get this a lot of times from some of the people that we work with. There's some of the people who have a new product company that we're about to work with, or just people in the field. We'll go to a show or we'll go to an event and meet some people, and I always ask them, how much is it that you are going to spend this year on marketing? And then they get the same answer every time. I have no idea. And then what the person ends up doing is they go back and they start counting in their head and they look at all the shows, the Facebook ads, the Instagram ads, all the other components of what they're doing in their marketing process and try and count up, oh, maybe I am spending X or maybe I'm spending Y. And the reason that's super critical to know how much you're actually spending is because that is going to be a leading measure of success. It is going to tell you exactly how well you're going to do based on your spending. Now, there are other factors involved for sure, but one thing I can tell you is that people who don't spend enough on marketing, doesn't matter how good they are at sales, they could always be doing better. So because of that, what we really focus on is let's evaluate the numbers first, figure out how that's going to fit into your total budget, where is the money allocated, what things are you actually doing, and then how can you adjust that budget as time goes on. Now, just for reference for the listeners, most of the companies that we work with are under $5 million gross annual revenue. So these numbers apply mostly to that. But if you're a bigger company, this kind of concept still applies. You just have to figure out what other methods you're going to need to do in order to be competitive across the whole landscape. So there's something called the 5% rule. And the 5% rule talks about the portion of gross revenue that you should be spending on marketing every single year. So just to give a simple example, a small business, maybe in the first 5 years of their business, let's say they hit $1 million, which wouldn't be that crazy. I think that would be pretty average, especially if there's multiple people on the team. You're sitting at $1 million at 5%, that's $50,000 per year. And most marketing budgets you should be splitting out per month because not every investment you're making is going to be a total for the whole year type of investment. And some of them are going to be beyond a whole year investment. And so what we like to do is use the 5% rule to say it's $50,000 a year, which breaks down to about $6,000 a month. Now, those funds, we do not allocate any of those funds to operational things like websites and Facebook pages and all that. This is money that is being spent with the intent of generating prospects, business opportunities, leads, and then ultimately going towards closing those deals. Most of the people that are spending money on marketing do not do a good job tracking it. So what I'm going to do in this episode here is kind of break down where you should be spending your money. Now, firstly, you need to decide, do you have a consumer product, a B2B product, or do you have a combination of the two? If the answer is that you have a combination of the two, we'll talk about that in a little bit here, but let me first start with the consumer product. If you have a consumer-only product, meaning it's usually low cost, it's usually disposable, then you are going to be spending most of your time on two different things: consumer trade shows, and then Facebook, Instagram, potentially YouTube. Now, YouTube is one of those things a lot of people are not spending money on marketing yet, but they're going to notice that that's a very good consumer marketplace, so you might as well look at it and try and learn it so you could spend the money there. In the consumer marketing world, to get anything effective done for a smaller product, you need to be spending between $4,000 and $6,000 a month on Facebook and Instagram combined. And not all the viewers here are also going to understand that upfront or no upfront that Instagram is owned by Facebook. So when you're spending money on Facebook, if you set it all up properly, you're ultimately going to be spending that money on Instagram as well. So I would say you should spend money on those two things. You spend it on Facebook and Instagram together. You got to spend, again, $4,000 to $6,000 is probably a pretty fair assessment. Although I would say that there are definitely opportunities where you could spend less than that and probably make it make sense. And then beyond that, you're going to spend your money on direct spending, which is when you're going to close a deal and you have to spend money to actually go there and pitch that one person or that one group of people. And then you're going to have your in-person spending or event spending. And that's going to come back to like your trade shows or maybe like an in-service that you do with a small consumer group or maybe at a school or something like that. If you have that kind of product where you're selling to consumers, you should really focus on social media engagement and make sure that you know who your audience is. Now, the one difficulty that you're going to have with some of these platforms like Facebook and Instagram is they're algorithmic, meaning that the platforms themselves, like Facebook, are actually spending time to figure out how should we set up our algorithm so that it's the best for our people using the ad platform. And that sounds great and all, but the algorithm changes all the time, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, or it's substantially different than what you're used to. And when that's the case, you really have to look at, well, it seemed like a great idea to spend the money here, but now all of a sudden you have a different algorithm in place, which means your ads that used to be performing really well are no longer performing. And that can be a very frustrating situation if you're trying to, you have your own business, you're trying to run your own Facebook and Instagram ads. That's going to be extremely challenging. So if you're going to do that and have a personal brand and a business brand and spend money on Facebook and Instagram to try and drive traffic, you should really look at understanding the platform. And if you're not willing to take that step, then I would say you should probably find somebody to do it. We don't really spend a lot of time doing consumer marketing. There certainly are times where we do that in the healthcare space, but consumer marketing takes a very different mindset than business to business marketing. And we have this duality of some of the products that we work with where there's a consumer focus on it, but then there's also a clinician focus. And probably the easiest example I can give of that is probably CBD products. Most CBD products, some of them will say, oh, well, we only do business with professionals, chiropractors, things like that. But here, the really interesting thing about that is most of the time they are reselling through a physician. So that looks like they're going out there, they're taking their product, they're selling it to a chiropractor, physical therapist, a physiatrist, an occupational therapist, and then that person's reselling it. And there's this two-step 100% markup process. So a company's manufacturing something for $10, they're reselling it for $20 to the chiropractor, and the chiropractor's reselling it for $40 to the actual patient. And if that's the case, that's totally okay. There's nothing really wrong with that model. But just keep in mind that when you have a duality between a consumer and a business product, your marketing gets substantially more complicated because you have to be tailoring to both of those. And then there's also more decision making that needs to be in place, because you can, as a company, you can sit there and say, well, would I rather go to one chiropractor, one physical therapist who then can sell to many patients who are ultimately consumers? Or would you rather just sell to the consumer yourself and take all of that margin? There's obviously substantially more margin when you're selling directly to the end user, but there's a lot of other steps that have to go in there to figure out, well, does this make sense? So again, you either have a consumer product or a business product, and in the business to business world, I always recommend your spending is per sales rep. So if you have, back to our $1 million example there, if you're a $1 million company and you have to spend $5,000 or $50,000 a year and $6,000 a month, I would recommend that probably half that budget, around, let's say you had 5 or 6 people, half that budget, $2,500, $3,000, should be per sales rep, where you're investing those funds directly with that rep to do business to business prospecting to people like the chiropractor or maybe a medical spa or that intermediary step where it's not the actual end user of the product. And if you're not allocating your funds based on sales reps, and then at the end of the year you're confused as to why your sales reps did not perform, or why the sales volume's down, or why one region sucks, it's because you didn't spend the time to do the math to figure out where to actually spend your money. So instead of being silly about it, just actually go back, look at your sales reps, look at your past year earnings, and figure out what markets did well, what markets didn't do well, and the ones that did not perform, put more money into those so that you can have better advertising, prospecting, leads, and sales opportunities in that market. Just use the data to guide yourself. Don't sit there and wonder, oh, why did this guy not do a good job? It must be the sales rep's fault. There are many times it is the sales rep's fault, and they're not enough follow-up, or they're not motivated, or whatever it is. But a lot of it comes down to, oh, you didn't really actually spend any money there. You got a sales rep in Montana, and you do a lot of sales on the East Coast, and you go, oh, I'm not spending money in Montana because it's so big. And then that sales rep doesn't perform like all the guys on the East Coast, and you wonder why. Well, it's really quite simple. You just didn't spend enough money for marketing, exposure, branding, sales opportunities, and pitches, right? You need to be doing demos. You need to be showing your product to people. And if you're not willing to spend the time to do that, then yeah, you're going to have a serious problem. So that's kind of my take on the business to business world. Just to break that back down, if you have a consumer product, you should be doing Facebook and Instagram. YouTube, if you're going to get creative, that's a pretty cost-effective space to get started right now. It's kind of nearing the end of 2019 here. But if you're B2B, you should be focusing on things like LinkedIn, email marketing, utilizing your CRM and having call points, doing 50, 60 dials a day per sales rep, those kind of things. And then also your direct spending, which would be things like travel or going to a school to sell the product or whatever it is as that intermediary. And then you have your in-person, like you go to a trade show, an actual event, and you have to spend to be there. Most trade shows are going to cost you $3,000 to $5,000 to be there for a one-time thing. And then if you go to another event like a network marketing or just some kind of marketing business-to-business type event, that there's going to be some spend associated with that. So that's kind of my recommendation there. Now, back to the sales team, regardless if you're consumer focused or if you're business focused, you should still be looking at breaking down your spending by sales rep. Meaning that if you have a team of 100 people, you need to look at how can you make your spending go across 100 different people. Don't look at it like, oh, I got to spend more money. Look at it as you're going to lose opportunity if you don't spend that money. Because if you're already paying sales reps, regardless if they're 1099 or W-2, they're still spending their time and effort to go out there and prospect. So you might as well support that. Now, if you're exclusively in the 1099 world, I would say more so than ever, you should be spending money on marketing, because you're not spending money on salaries like the W-2 situation, and you don't have payroll tax, and you don't have benefits and all this. So you're spending 30% less anyways, and you're only paying when deals are done. So it'd make tons of sense to honestly just sit there and say, well, this person's really not costing that much money. So why not put a bunch of it into marketing? And if that's a business to business relationship, I'd say 100% go all in on LinkedIn, email, and then your trade shows if it makes sense for your product. The smaller your product is, the harder it's going to be to show a positive ROI, but that's why you need to have a relationship-driven marketing plan and not just a one-to-one sales plan. If all of your marketing is around, I spend X dollars and get Y result, you're probably going to lose because you're not able to track that very well, and you're not able to track it very well over time. And so especially with consumables, something like a CBD product or a tape or a band or a lotion or a ball or something like that, they're small products with small margins, but you're trying to win on getting multiple sales over time and having that go back out to the marketplace. Have the chiropractor order 10 of them a month, 12 months of the year, so you get 120 sales out of them. That's where you want to focus and have the mindset of, this is how we're going to grow, don't have the mindset of, oh, well, this deal, we only made $30 on it right now. Well, that's okay, because it's going to be a recurring revenue type opportunity. Just to switch gears here a little bit, I want to talk about growth strategy with marketing in the first 5 years. So when you have a business that's just starting off, a lot of the groups we work with are small business, entrepreneur run, a lot of healthcare CEOs, CTOs, COOs. And because of that, their business acumen is not as much focused around finances, but more focused around clinical results, which is totally makes sense, because that's really the primary way that people look at things when they've been a clinician for so long. But at the end of the day, you need to look at reinvestment opportunities in the first 5 years. So if you're climbing, your first year you do 100K, and then the next year maybe you do 250, then maybe you do 500, and then you maybe do 800, and then you do $1 million. That kind of progression should be looking at ensuring that you're spending at least 5% in the first 5 years. You should be spending more than 5% ideally to be successful. So somewhere around 10% is what I like to see. But if you can't afford that because you have other payroll and you have a bunch of W-2 people and things like that, then that's totally okay. It makes sense. But I would still kind of urge you to consider reinvesting those funds instead of taking a distribution or a dividend or increasing salaries at the top level, at the foundership level. Put that money back into your reps, and also put some of that money into getting additional people for additional regions, or go the 1099 route where you're going to get 40 to 50 people and you're going to end up churning 10 to 15% of those people per year, because they're not always focused and motivated by your product or whatever the situation is. So I would say reinvest a minimum of 5% every single year until you get to the number you're looking for, and really push that to 10%. If you're a very new company and you're, self-funded or whatever the situation is, I would recommend starting with probably 10 to 15 sales reps, metropolitan areas only, regardless if it's consumer or business. Make sure you have 10 to 15 people. Pay them $10.99, pay them really well, try and get them to 30 to 40% if possible, so that they're killers and they want to stay. And then look at that and say, well, I haven't spent any money until I make money. So you're going to spend closer to 10% out of the gate on marketing. And that's like a pretty good gauge. So if you want to say, all right, well, I want to make $1 million, right? And I want to spend 10%. Well, 10% is $100K, which means you're going to be spending, somewhere around $8,000 a month or more. So if you want to crush it out of the gate, you better be prepared to spend $8,000 a month for 3 to 4 months and be able to cash strap that yourself, or have investorship that's going to make that make sense, so that you can get it out the door. If you don't want to be that aggressive, again, that 5% rule is really going to be conservative, but also probably practical for most people. And that's okay if 5% is really all you can do. There's really no issues with that. But don't drop below that. Don't be a 1% to 2% spender and say, oh, I don't want to do trade shows, and I don't want to do Facebook, and I don't want to do Instagram, and I don't want to do YouTube, and oh, I'm not sure how this works or how that works. That's totally not an excuse at all. You need to be spending the money to actually make money. And then the last part of it is, well, people come to us and say, oh, I don't know how to do it. That's totally fine. As a small business owner, especially if you're a healthcare entrepreneur, you already have a clinical background. You already spent a million years in school, and you've already spent a lot of time developing a great product. Hire somebody who knows what they're doing. Whether that's an internal employee or you want to contract that out, it doesn't really matter, but hire somebody who's going to manage this for you. Manage your social media, manage your advertising, manage your trade shows, get a booth set up, get a nice display, get some opportunities that you guys can put your salespeople on so that you guys can grow. And if you look at it, honestly, in a small business environment, it's a lot better to outsource that because of payroll tax. So if you're going to spend your 50 to 60K a year in a $1 million business, that 50K, you're not even going to be able to cover a marketing person's salary. And then you got to put all that money into advertising spend. So my recommendation there is really simple. Outsource the work, get a retainer going, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month. Pay that to a marketing team, someone that's small. Don't go to a huge organization, go to a small group, someone who's got under 20 employees, and say, listen, I'll give you X number of dollars. What can I expect for that? And hopefully, if they're good at their healthcare marketing, they're going to look at things like, how can I market per sales rep? How can I market per region? How can I split the difference across multiple platforms? And then if it's a business product and they're selling on Facebook, you're out of your mind. And the reason I say that is because if you're selling to a physiatrist or orthopedic surgeon, there's almost 0% chance they're spending any of their valuable time on Facebook waiting to be served an ad. However, they are on LinkedIn. They do check their email. They do take in-person appointments. They do have physician liaisons that you can talk to, and a few other things that can be done that would make tons of sense for you. So don't worry so much about who your audience is, other than the fact, are they consumer or are they a business, and tailor all of your marketing around that. In year 2 and 3, when you start growing, it might make sense to bring someone on part-time or maybe even full-time as a W-2 employee in your business. But most of the time, there's going to be 2 co-founders or maybe just one founder of the business, and then this kind of fringe 1099 sales force, or maybe a couple W-2 salespeople, which is totally fine. But you have to be super cautious about how you do that, because you need to have marketing going. It's kind of like putting gas in the car. Everybody understands that if you don't put gas in the car eventually stops working. But in business, people don't put gas in the engine for some reason. They sit there and go, oh, well, maybe this month I don't have to spend as much on gas. Okay, well, if you plan on driving less, that's true. But at the end of the day, you probably want to put money in there. And there's actually a difference between the different levels of gas you get, right? Putting in premium is going to be a little bit better than putting in 87. So at the end of the day, think about not only where you spend your money, but how you spend your money, and focus on outsourcing that opportunity to other people so that you can focus on selling it, especially if you're still sitting in the clinic. Some of the groups that we work with have great entrepreneurs that have a great product or service that they're selling to the healthcare space or some other market, but they're still in their practice or in their full-time job or whatever it is that they do. And at the end of the day, that's totally impractical to be spending all of their own time on it. The last piece of advice I'll give is look at what you're doing as a business. If you're making $100 an hour as the owner, marketing is going to cost you $30 an hour for a person. Just outsource that. There's no way. If I told you today, you give me $30, I'll give you $100 back. You do it every single day. So why do you not do that with your marketing? You should always be willing to trade that kind of amount, and don't look at it like, oh, it's $30 less I have. Look at it as it's $70 that you saved.